Okay, well, welcome to the webinar this morning. My name is Brian Orender. I'm president of Charitable Advisors and publisher of the Not-for-Profit News, and I'm excited to be joining the crew from Luna today. We've been getting acquainted with them over the last few months and are excited to be a partner. And you may have noticed in the newsletter lately that many of our articles are now also available in Spanish, and that's compliments of Luna, and we've really enjoyed working with them. So I'd like to introduce Marina Waters, who's president of Luna Language Services, a full-service language services agency providing translation and interpretation services to clients throughout the state of Indiana as well as the nation. Marina provides Title VI consulting, and you'll find out what that is. I wasn't familiar with what Title VI consulting meant, so you'll learn about that today. But she provides Title VI consulting to clients and the community, as well as speaks publicly on the important topics of non-discrimination, multiculturalism, and corporate social responsibility. She also works directly with clients to build extensive language access plans, which is our focus today, for their organizations, ensuring they have the resources and plans in place to bridge language gaps between their team and their consumers. Today, she'll be bringing the basics of language access planning to us, to help us understand how to create a basic access language plan for our teams and ensure that they can communicate with and serve community members from different language backgrounds. So I'll just give you a heads up, I'm having a little bit of AV problem this morning, so we'll work it out. But if something sounds funny, it's my fault. So.
Thank you, Brian. And before we dive into the learning part, I thought we could warm up a little bit with some conversation around this topic.
Sure.
Brian, I know through your work with Charitable Advisors, you're interacting with so many different organizations, and I'm curious to know, and I'm sure the audience is too, how have you seen diversity impact and challenge some of the organizations you've worked with over the last several years?
Yeah. Well, I think in our kind of get acquainted initially, we kind of talked about, kind of some of my first encounters with organizations like Catholic Charities up in Fort Wayne with the Burmese influx in the late aughts, and then some of the other around here, in the last 10 years. But what I'm finding now as I'm talking to clients is that they're just becoming more and more sensitive to kind of accessibility and recognizing how important it is to be able not just to reach out, but that there's such a broader audience than they probably are serving, here in central Indiana. That the people who walk through their doors tend to be, of a similar demographic, and they're kind of realizing that they need to do something in order to reach beyond that.
I couldn't agree more. And in my work, I've seen many of the same trends. I'm curious because other people on the workshop today, this might be their first encounter with language access planning. So aside from our conversation a few days ago, Brian, when I say language access planning, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I don't know if that term is particularly descriptive for me. I mean, I get it. It has the important words in it, but that terminology probably makes me think about, well, so, do I have to have all kinds of translation capabilities and things like that within my organization? Do I have to publish? Do we have to do everything we do in 40 languages or something? It feels kind of overwhelming and intimidating.
Thanks for your honesty. And I think probably a lot of people share that, especially when they hear this is tied to compliance. So Brian, you're off the hook for a while of answering questions. Let's just dive into the workshop. Our goal today is language access planning 101. A very tip of the iceberg of a plan and a tool that many different organizations can use. On your screen, you see just a few of the elements of them, most of which we'll dive in and touch on today. But to give you some context, Brian mentioned, I do some consulting with language access planning for other organizations. And when we did the language access plan for the Indianapolis airport, that process took about 9 months. Okay, so there was a lot of policies that need to be written and data that needed to be reviewed, and it was a compliance document for them. Now, the tool that we'll be talking about today isn't meant to be that extensive. It's meant to be pared down for a smaller organization. But it very much touches upon a lot of the same elements. So we'll discuss that. What I'm hoping you get out of today is just understanding the general concept of what a language access plan is and how you can use it, understand the case for it, and then actually start getting some practice with it. Brian mentioned my work with Luna and that we do interpreting and translating. Our work started in the community 20 years ago. We just are celebrating our 20th anniversary. We very much started doing on-site interpreting work in hospitals, courts, and schools. We'll talk about why we started there, but our work has extended out into all sectors, certainly the not-for-profit sector. And on top of on-site interpreting, now we're doing all kinds of translation work, virtual work, phone interpreting, and as you can see, American Sign Language interpreting. I'd like to give a quick thank you to Rebecca Bahan, our ASL interpreter for the day, who's signing her own name right now. All in all, though, our mission as a company is to increase language access for the diverse communities that you're all serving. Language access planning. So the big picture before we dive in, really the purpose of a language access plan is to develop and implement a system which your organization can use to identify, track, and serve individuals who don't speak English or don't use English. We're going to be talking about gaining meaningful access to your organization. And it also is a tool to inform not just the public that you provide access in terms of different languages, but a tool for your own organization for budgeting and strategic planning around the future of your programs. Today, we're going to cover a lot of this. There is a part 2 to this workshop in 2 weeks that will really just focus in on budgeting. Once you set up a plan, you need to start raising funds or setting aside funds for anything that is going to be a cost to your programs. And that is very useful for grant writing and any kind of budget planning. So if you can make that in 2 weeks, I won't be giving that, but my colleague Una will, and she will be using real translation examples of projects that she's done for not-for-profit. So it should be a great overview. Okay, I'm going to ask, this is the first part of your interactive part of the presentation. And let's see, I'm going to see if I can see my chat. I can, there it is. I'm going to ask someone, anyone, who can tell me the source of law to establish language access and the duty to create a language access plan. And I'll give you a hint, it's not just one, there's many. So if you can think of any kind of source of law out there that might establish language access rights and the duty that some organizations have that they must create a language access plan. Let's see, get your chat going. I see Title 7. I see ADA. These are good answers. Anything else? Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Mel. Hospital policies, certainly. Thank you, Jenna. And anything else that you can think of? You're probably thinking of others. Another title. Yes, another title. There's another title. Okay, let's get back to my program. There we go. We're not going to go into a long laundry list of laws, although I could, and I will, if you ever ask me to. Language access, first and foremost, is known from, well, let me start with the biggest picture, just sort of the inherent human right to express one's culture and language. That comes from a human rights model. Here in the US, we have Title VI, which might be the other title someone mentioned, from the Civil Rights Act, and that's the non-discrimination clause within Title VI. That actually is the basis and foundation for all of my work and the work that we started doing inside of the hospitals and courts about 20 years ago. We also have executive orders that have stemmed from both sides of the political spectrum. We have local laws and policies. We certainly have institutional, like hospital policies. And then we also have laws more recently, like the ACA and the other Department of Labor and some other aspects of the government, which have written in mandates for language access, excuse me. So it's very, very much supported. I should say it's also enforced first and foremost by the Department of Justice. Who should have a plan? Well, any organization who is serving or wants to be serving individuals who do not use English, first and foremost, do not understand English very well, and that includes the deaf community. They should develop a plan, okay? But who must have a plan? Because there are some organizations that must have a plan, and some of your organizations, I can tell by looking at the a participant list, could fall into these categories. According to the laws, some of which I mentioned, organizations that receive federal funds, okay, and this could be a public hospital, like courts and schools, but it could also very well be community-based organizations that have any ties to government funding. And that could be through the state, or it could be through federal grant programs. So that is where a lot of not-for-profits kind of get on the hook of needing to have a plan. There's also accreditation organizations, especially in healthcare, that would expect a language access plan for, and that would be mostly hospitals and people or organizations providing healthcare. I want to know, back to you all, let's go back to our chat, okay? I could tell you what the case for language access planning is, and I will, but I also want to know from you all, from the participants, if you can think of a good argument, or if you needed to advocate for a language access plan for your organization, what would be some of the reasons for that? I also see a question about, would organizations receiving PPP funds be included for the mandatory category? I will take a leap of faith and say no, only because that has extended to so many organizations, many which may be receiving federal funds, under that very narrow case for COVID relief. But I promise, if I find out otherwise, I will email personally everyone on this workshop. Let me hear from anyone on the case for inclusion. Let's do that. The case for inclusion. I know a lot of organizations and leaders and community members are certainly talking a lot about inclusion and equity. And what's the case for it around language? Informed consent, definitely. It's a human right. I like that. It enables us to meet our mission to serve multiple constituents, absolutely. And it helps community members learn to advocate for their own neighborhoods, get plugged into local resources. I love this one, Livy, provides better, more adequate services. And Jackie says to ensure all communities have the access to the resources they need. Saves a life, yay. Okay, so you've touched on a bunch. You know, I would get a little even selfish about it in terms of not just looking at how it helps the community out there, because it does, but it also really helps an organization expands its services to new markets. There's a true business case for language access. And it expands a brand to new communities. This is big because a lot of multilingual and distinct cultural groups out there are very loyal to certain brands. You really see that through market research. And once your brand can get into, say, the Burmese community, you might have not just a few new participants, but a whole lot. We see this so much in healthcare, actually, in certain medical clinics, where certain groups will go because they know they can get interpreters. We see this in the deaf community. They know which companies provide access to them. I would argue that the overall value of your organization just increases because you now have capacity to serve more people. That's the value of your programs as well. Cultural inclusion. I feel like I don't even need to talk about that because it's so tied into the DEI conversations that so many of us are having. Some really important ones that I want to point out, it increases really safety for your program participants and the effectiveness of your programs, right? So you might have someone who you think speaks English and you're handing them out all this information and resources, but maybe they really don't. And so they're not receiving all the wonderful resources you have to share with them. It really does decrease risk for your organization in terms of miscommunication and getting something wrong and putting others at risk. Compliance for all the recipients of federal funds. And one of my favorites, it's just not cool. It's not cool to exclude people, especially some who are already marginalized members of our community. And we know that's none of your intent. So a language access plan does help that. We see a clear trend actually for inclusion planning inside of missions and strategic plans, certainly all over Indiana, and I am certain probably all over the nation. And this includes funding organizations. So funders are going to want to see this inside of your strategic plans and see it in your programs. Brian helped me as we were planning for this. Thank you for the reminder, Brian, that there were going to be some terms that I was using that might not be, that might be new to you. So I'll just go over a few. LEP is really a made up government word. It's limited English proficiency. And it basically means people who have limited English capabilities or aren't proficient in English. And that's the term that you see on all the laws and in the compliance documents. And so we borrowed from that in my industry. And we sort of we just shorten it, but we take for granted that not everyone knows that term. And it kind of dehumanizes the people. So it's not the best term necessarily to use, but if you hear me use it or see it, now you know what it means. It hasn't traditionally included the deaf population, but it's important, I believe, for everyone who uses it to define it as such. The deaf and hard of hearing population may not use English. They may, but may not. So if you're program planning around people who aren't proficient or using English, you want to include them. Meaningful access is a legal standard. So it's one of those words, the lawyer in me learned that certain words are important to use a lot. So you'll hear me talk about it, but you also want to start using it yourself in terms of your own standards. Like, are people able to get meaningful access to our programs? Do they have and it's just really what it sounds like. Is it meaningful to them, or are they not getting us? Are they not getting what they need out of what we're intending to provide them? And last but not least, vital documents. these are very important documents. Again, it sort of is what it sounds like. But I would say documents and forms and information, even on your website, that people would need, that would be necessary for them to use or fill out to participate in your programs. So the easiest one I saw in the chat was informed consent. Most programs have consent forms. A lot of programs provide resources. Some would argue those are key to your program success, and others would argue that's not a vital document. Certainly instructions on how to engage with you. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, but think about things that are critical for people to understand what you do and how you'll impact their lives.
Marina, can I jump in for just a minute?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Brian.
you had in our earlier conversation, you had kind of given me a shortcut that I've actually already used in a couple conversations with organizations, and recognizing that the inconsistency that can come up so quickly. That I was working with a community center in town a number of years ago, and they were very cognizant that their neighborhood, the demographics of their neighborhood and their service area were changing pretty quickly. And yet the demographics of the people they were serving were not.
Yes.
And you threw that out as kind of a quick gut check to say, who is in your service area, and how is that consistent or different with the people that you're serving?
Right.
And they were very aware that they had a large Spanish-speaking population coming into their neighborhoods and their community. And it wasn't until they had a Spanish-speaking, receptionist and some staff that they were able to, kind of tap in and serve that audience, even though in their minds they were being welcoming. They were trying to reach out. They were trying to be supportive of that community, but it wasn't happening.
Absolutely. And I think that is key to understanding the importance and urgency, really, to create an awareness around language and cultural diversity in the community in general. It's a good check to ask if our insides match our outsides. Another thing I often will say is the program we're planning for the community we think we are, or is it for the community we're becoming, right? So that's why it's also really important to look at trends, demographic trends, and we'll talk about how you can do that. But thank you, Brian, for bringing that up. So back to here. I sent you, or Tiffany, my colleague, so I also want to thank for helping make this happen today, sent out a tool that is a language access planning tool. Your copy is going to look different than my copy. I'm going to switch over to that. Can I have a thumbs up? Brian, can you see? Yes. Okay, great. Fantastic. So we are going to just start diving in to the language access planning tool. So I promised you by the end of the hour today that you'd get a little practice. And my goal is that you have a document that's already started that you can feel comfortable completing with others at your organization. I need to take a minute and shout out Exodus Refugee. Exodus is a refugee resettlement organization. For those of you in the area, I'm sure you know about it. It provides resettlement services to the whole state, and it has been a key partner of Luna's in that we recruit from Exodus's clients for our employees and our interpreters. So it's an employment avenue for us. We also service many of their clients out in the community. Exodus was kind enough. I also sit on the board of Exodus, so I've been gotten to know that organization really well, and they've been kind enough to share part of their language access plan with us. So I could give you some real not-for-profit examples of exoduses in going through this guide. So thanks to them. So we already talked about what a language access plan is, sort of. You'll get to understand it more. We talked about who should have a plan. We talked about if it's mandatory, and that has to do with whether an organization receives federal funding or grants. And we talked about the case for it. What are some key reasons? This is a 4-part test. We are not going to have time to get into today. This is very important if you are part of a very large organization and expect an audit from the Department of Justice, a Title VI or Civil Rights Act audit. If so, there's 4-part test you'll go through. We are essentially going to cover the elements of it today, but if you do want more information on that, my contact information will be available to you, and reach out to me and I can send you this part of the guide. So the first part of the plan is really a simple one. Now, we're not going to spend much time on it because, let's see, sorry, this is where my magic appears. So basically, you are just going to start filling this out with all the information you already know about your organization, okay? So who you are, your status, where you are located, easy, right? And then you're going to provide a legal framework for the language access plan. Even if you're not in the must category, you're still going to do this. Why? Because it helps in terms of your grant writing when you want to make that case for why you're including language access in your grants and into your programs. You're going to reference those laws because those laws matter, especially to a lot of funders, and they should matter to everyone. These are good laws, these non-discriminatory laws. So do reference those. Those will be in your tool I provided. So don't feel like you need to write them up quickly. The purpose of your plan. Okay, so this is sort of a stock answer. And you can see that Exodus wanted to take reasonable steps. Those of you who might have some legal or policy background will notice that reasonable steps is also a legal term. It means you're not going to do everything. You're only going to do what's feasible within your budget, within your power, to ensure people with limited English proficiency. You see, they said, including those who are deaf and hard of hearing. And again, you see gain meaningful access, okay? So effective communication, it talks about why it's critical for providing their services. And really that argument should be pretty much the same for all of you. And it's some of the things we talked about, but it's kind of just that, common sense answer of that if you want the whole community or more of your community, or especially the multilingual part of your community to participate, a plan like this is going to help. And you make this matched to your vision and to the mission of your organizations. So again, this is where you will be able to look at your own vision and your own mission and tie it in there. I think you can take this back into strategic planning, and as you're building new strategy for your organization, you can echo some of these, even if you're reevaluating your vision or your mission. Okay, so services provided. I'm going to ask you to take a quick minute and just think of, because some of you provide services that may be already available to people of all cultures and language. Or you might provide such a broad range of services, or a very narrow one. What I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of take a little bit of a, take stock in some of the services that you feel would be most important to provide to the largest amount of people in our community. So that's for you to figure out and sort of prioritize. But in doing that, it will actually help you in your planning, because remember, you're just going to take reasonable steps. You can't bite off everything. Brian in the beginning mentioned that this concept was a little intimidating because most organizations are only in English in terms of their website, for example. Most organizations might only have information in Spanish and maybe no other languages. We don't want you to feel like creating a tool like this is going to tie you into promising the whole spectrum of services. It really won't. So in services provided, Exodus actually just focused on the key services that were relevant to language access planning. It's a little different because Exodus actually services, by the nature of their clients, they don't necessarily speak English, but you get the idea. If you were all in the room today, I'd have like a show of hands. How many people have been part of a needs assessment? It'd be a lot of you, because many organizations are advised to do needs assessments either inside their organizations or out in the community that they're wishing to serve prior to creating programs. And for the grant writers in the group, often you want to define the need out there before you actually ask for funding for that need or even create your program. So in identifying the populations that you need to serve, I'm going to walk you through this, and then we're going to take a few minutes and I'm going to talk to you about the demographics here in Indiana and really nationwide. For a needs assessment for Exodus, in identifying its target population, it just talked about the population that it's already serving. So it's not getting into necessarily language in that population. It's just asking you to look into your planning and your vision again, and who are you trying to serve? Who are the benefits of your services? And also, of course, who are the stakeholders, the larger stakeholders of the plan? Well, the target population for Exodus is the refugee and the refugee families who are being resettled. The stakeholders includes, the community at large. It includes the staff at Exodus. It includes the network of people that are linked to that refugee or their families. So when you start thinking of a plan for stakeholders, the importance of that is some of your programs might involve youth, and you might really need information for parents. A lot of times, youth or second generation immigrants speak English wonderfully, but their parents who are signing consent forms do not. So these are the reasons you want to really extrapolate. Who is everyone that we want to include in our program planning? I'm going to take you through the quantifying the individuals who need language assistance, and then we're going to jump back to the slides and really talk about demographics. Brian mentioned the importance of knowing the community outside or where your organization rests or not. And it's not just the community, like I said, that you think it is. It's the community it's becoming. And demographic data is so powerful in terms of teaching us who's out there in our community. Exodus, and first I'm just going to show you what they came up with, and then we're going to go back and see where they got it from. But Exodus determined that their LEP population to be served was, they took that data from the census, okay? You want to define which census you took it from, and we'll talk about that. They included a report of incoming clients that they had on hand. They were keeping data already. We'll talk about data and why it's important to track your own data as an organization of your users. And they also took data from other refugee organizations and organizations that are tracking refugee traffic throughout the nation. And you will see that after sort of citing that, they went in and talked about the actual census data. In Marion County, where Exodus resides, at least 13.5% of its residents do not use English in their home. Exodus learned that from looking at the census, and you can get that information as well. We know the top 15 lists, actually we know more than that, of languages spoken in every state and really in every county. But looking at the state, Exodus could look at that list and then identify which languages tracked or crossed over into the majority of their users. Okay, so on that list, if you're here in Indiana, there is Pennsylvania Dutch. Okay, now I was really surprised to learn Pennsylvania Dutch showed up on a list of the top languages. And if I'm creating a program, say for the east side of Indianapolis, I might choose not to include Pennsylvania Dutch as one of my languages. But, you know, if I was located up in Amish country and I knew I had a lot of people that English was not the first language they used, and they did speak a Pennsylvania Dutch or you know, similar language, then it would really be important for me to spell that out here. So this is a combination of looking at data and then really knowing your community and who you plan to serve and who would be best served by your programs. Exodus used their own data, and you can see in 2019, they spelled out exactly which refugees that they resettled and which countries they came from. And over the past 6 years, 83 different languages were spoken by Exodus clients. So again, this is just an internal census. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this paragraph in the chat. And those of you who are on the chat can just copy it and paste it. I don't know if I put this in your guide or not in your toolkit, but it's a good little model. I think that might have gone, hopefully, did that go through, Tiffany? Yes, no, it didn't. Let me try again. Oh, I sent it just to one person, that's why. There we go. You can just copy and paste that. And that is sort of summarizing the suggestion of identifying your data sources, which will be external, and then hopefully some internal tracking that you do. And then also then narrowing down some of the languages that you know you want to include. Often organizations don't have the budget to include all the languages. So I recommend picking a few timeframes and saying, okay, over the next year to 3 years, we're gonna tackle Spanish, here we see Spanish, Portuguese, and French Creole, okay? But by 5 years, we're gonna hope to have the funding and resources to add in Russian or Vietnamese. So those are just samples, but there you go. While I'm switching over, Ryan, I have another question for you. Brian, how do you see data being, this is sort of a softball, but it doesn't have to do with language. How do you see data being just a critical tool for the organizations that you're working with? Why is data tracking important to them?
Yeah, I think that that's become more important in a number of different lanes, right? That nonprofits are being more and more conscious of data from a fundraising standpoint, and knowing kind of where money's coming from and their relationships with their donors. Also on the client side and the community side. So with the organizations that I work with, they're kind of all across the board in terms of their level of sophistication, in terms of the information that they gather, whether that's as people are coming through the door or participating in their services, or more needs assessment, broader data from the community that they bring in. But I hear the term data-driven decision making more in a week now than I used to hear in a year.
Yes, and you hear evidence-based everything these days, right? And certainly funders like to see data behind their requests. It's one thing to get external data, which I'm going to show you how to do for demographics. Only you and your programs can start tracking your internal usage data. I will tell you now, in case we don't have time later, that tracking that internal usage data will help you measure your progress, right? And how far you're coming in expanding your language access to the community. So this year, it might be that you didn't have any Arabic speakers request services from you. But you know that there are a number out there in the community from your demographic data search. And so what you'd hope is that after putting some information on a website or making some effort around extending marketing into the Arabic speaking communities, you might start being able to see that going forward. So, all right. So I know that there's often like an aha moment when people really start looking at who we are. And I know that there are some participants on this call from my home state in California and out on the West Coast and elsewhere. And I'll be using some Indiana data as a reference point, but we'll also be looking at some national data. If we were in person, I love to do a test to see who can guess, who can guess the most amount of languages that are existent in your community, not just around the world. That's like thousands and thousands. But often people come up with like 12, maybe 18. I think the most I've ever gotten is up to like in the 20s. This is an outdated list of some of the languages we provide for on-site interpreting at Luna. So that tells you that 100 different language groups are living in our service area, and those are our stakeholders. And not only is there like one person for us to have an interpreter, there's a community there. So it's mind-blowing to so many people. And I'm sure that many of you here in Indiana, elsewhere, might not know, our biggest language group outside of Spanish and English, in American Sign Language, is Burmese and Burmese languages. This is just a historical fun fact. Our nation was really founded on multilingualism. Some of the earliest documents here in Indiana and in treaties throughout the nation were bilingual documents. This law actually mandated all of the initial founding documents in Indiana to be both written in French and in English. And so we have actually gone backwards. This is a quick sort of reminder of the roller coaster that the nation's been on in terms of diversity in our demographic snapshots. So you can see, you always hear we are a nation built on immigrants, and we truly are. We were writing in the end of the 1800s, around 14% of foreign-born population, okay? And then you can kind of see after the wars and then into the 50s, 60s, that population became less and less. And you can really tie that to restrictive laws and policies around immigration and our borders. And then population, you know, is rising. But since really the 70s, and then really since the biggest jump has been through since the 90s onward, we have growing, and we're really back to that 14, 15%. This is really interesting too. This chart shows the states that have 15% or more growth. So the states that the immigrant population is growing the fastest. It's not California and New York. It used to be, but now it's actually the Midwest. Indiana's being one of those. So this is telling you why we need to plan ahead. I can't get too much into this, but for workforce development, this chart actually shows you that our workforce between the ages of 20 and 60, 65, if you look at the demographics, immigrants and foreign-born individuals actually make up a greater proportion as a native population. So that's really important in terms of planning for your hiring. If you're not already looking to hire from diverse populations, I bet you are, but don't leave language out of that. In fact, I'll give a plug. If you don't have language as a skill on your job application, I recommend you do it. It will help you actually take an internal census of the languages inside of your organization. All of you have probably heard that more and more diverse populations are entering the workplace. Here in Indiana, we have data that I mentioned where you can see like the top 14 languages. We can get that data from the census, and I will show you where. But here in Indiana, you can see Spanish, that Germanic, is that Pennsylvania Dutch influence, Chinese, the Burmese, French, Arabic's on that list. It does not include American Sign Language because these are foreign languages, or spoken languages, I should say, rather. Here in Indiana, all of this data is actually on the demographic resource I provided for you, so I'm not going to go through it. But I want you to know that we are an incredibly diverse community here, and this is replicating so many communities across the nation if you're not here in Indiana. You've probably already heard that projections are, at least here in Indiana, are that by 2022, okay, that's next year, immigrants will account for 50% of our population growth. And by 2025, Indiana is expected to be a flip from a minority majority state. So it's very timely to start planning. We must not forget the deaf and hard of hearing in terms of your program planning. This group represents an estimated 10% of our population. Okay, so that's people that are born deaf or become deaf. And that could be due to even old age. So that's why that percentage is very high. Some states have higher concentration of ASL users. We're one of those. So there's also some facts about ASL in your demographics. You can also get demographic data by county. If you don't believe that certain counties maybe need ASL services, like maybe you're starting a new program in a certain county and you're not sure whether to offer those services, this can help you, just looking at data. How do you go about doing demographic research? Now, some people might have a lot of experience doing this. Other people might not have much at all. So I'm going to orient you to a website that will be very useful for you. Another resource you have in your handouts is a list of demographic sources for you. You will see on there lep.gov. There's our limited English proficiency term we talked about. This is an incredible website, and it helps organizations large and small. You can find links to multilingual resources of all kinds. You can also find a whole section on language access planning. So if I've sparked your interest and yet not given you enough, you can go to this website and really, there's plenty of tools here. We also will remain available. But this is the tool I really want to guide you towards. So if you are on the homepage, sorry for jumping around, you'll see a link to data and language maps. If you press on that, it takes you to a map app, which I've already filled out. But I went into my state, Indiana, and then I took Madison County. I'm not in Madison County, but I just selected that. And then I went and was able to pull up data, which I can then download and use however I want on the individual languages that are present, okay? You can even get down to a zip code level. So just know that this isn't like rocket science to get. You can get it by county and it can go straight into your language access plan. Please know there's some limitations because this is based off of old census data. And you can guess how easy it is for people who don't speak any English or use English to fill out the census. It's not that easy. So they do miss it. So please know that this is a limited view of what's probably really out there. But if you can strive to meet the needs of the census data in terms of representation of who your clients are, you're doing really great. We're coming in on the last 5 minutes of our planning. And so there's a few sections I just don't want you to miss out on. And I know there might be some questions around demographics. And if there are, I'd be just more than happy to answer those one-on-one. And again, we did provide some resources. So if you didn't get them yet, we'll send you another link to them or another email afterwards with some more information. So language services, this is where you're going to look at your internal and external resources for language services. Now you might have people in your organization that speak Spanish, for example, and you might be relying on them heavily to help with people. We see that all the time, and it's great, and you should. And there might be some people that speak languages you didn't even know about in your organization. So part of your census, your internal census, will be trying to look at your internal languages. Now, what you also want to do is use those resources responsibly. So I will give you an example. Brooks Place is an organization down the hall from Luna. They provide services and support to grieving children. Now they might have someone walk in off the street, just speaking, say, Spanish, and just wanting to know about their programs. It's completely appropriate for them, the person at the front desk, to grab someone down the hall who speaks Spanish and say, hey, can you orient them? Can you show them our Spanish documents? Can you tell them that they can make an appointment and we'll provide an interpreter? It would not be appropriate if that same person was coming back for mental health services, right? Or for a counseling service, because all of a sudden someone who's not trained professionally is interpreting and then not doing their own job too. So the language services part is really identifying when you're going to use professional services and really looking at your population and when are they going to need it and which services are they going to need. And it's a little more complicated, but for you, I would start simple. I would look sort of like on your website. Are there any languages? If not, you can partner with someone like us or someone who provides translation to just have a welcome language a welcome message in several languages, even a notice that interpreting can be provided. It might be as easy for walk-in clients to have a phone account set up with a language services company like Luna, where you just pick up the phone, put it on speakerphone, dial a number, and all of a sudden you have access to 200 languages for a short conversation, and it'll be interpreted in English and Spanish. We have a lot of organizations that use that tool. For ongoing appointments or more serious trainings or counseling, you might really want an on-site interpreter, and you would want a professional one. And so that's when you could reach out to an organization like Luna, and we could do some planning for events and different parts of your program. In the last 2 minutes, I'm going to remind you that you might have vital documents that need to be translated, and those are consent forms, intake forms, release of information, public health and emergency notifications, if that's any part. For Exodus, they identified those are vital documents. So they're going to translate those. Remember, they identified 3 or 4 languages. They're going to commit to doing that within, say, 2 years. It's up to you of the time frame. And then they're going to do their website in those 3 languages. And then they pick just some specific programs they're going to start out with. That is basically the gist of the big parts of the language access plan. Notices and training are parts of it that are a little bit down the road. Once you've got your plan in place, do you have notice of your plan to the people? And many people put it on their website. Training is how you're going to tell your staff about the plan. A simple tool that I wanted to point you to is a point to language tool. But this is something that you don't have to wait to do. Basically, if you are set up to provide any sort of interpreting or language services, whether it's on the phone or someone on site, you can have this guide just sitting in your intake or on your website, for example, telling people in their own language that an interpreter will be called. You can have signage up in your office, just in different languages. You should be thinking about a policy on diversity and inclusion. When you're doing that, think about language. And the last thing I want you to do is, as you're thinking about doing this, ask, are you the right person, or is there not someone else in your organization to lead this effort? So this is it. The language access plan is about increasing inclusion for your organization. It's about making sure that the whole community can benefit from your services. And I thank you so much for joining us. This is my direct email. You are more than welcome to use it. And we'll keep you up to date with other training opportunities. Brian, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Tiffany Hansen, my colleague, I want to thank her. She's a wonderful partner in just getting this news out to the community and beyond. And again, thank you, Rebecca.